From beyond the farthest reaches of our galaxy they come. Two brains pulsing with a strange energy. These space brains come to share their love of science fiction movies.
Okay, hi and welcome to Space Brains, the show where we joy watch sci-fi movies and talk about what was good and what was great. I'm Surrey and this is Mark.
Hiya. Tonight we're talking about the movie Spectral, so consider this your spoiler warning.
Yeah, so turn back now if you haven't seen this movie yet and then you can tune back in.
So Spectral is a science fiction thriller story centered on special ops team that is dispatched to fight supernatural beings in a war-torn sort of city. It's directed by Nic Mathieu. What was your number one takeaway from this, Surrey?
Number one takeaway is that science nerds can be heroes. That's pretty good.
Yep.
The other one, of course, I think is that it's really nice to be able to see sort of a mix of this possibly supernatural coming into science, where, because I'm always of the Arthur C. Clarke experience where any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Yeah, right. And so the thing is, if you can observe a ghost, then it's something that can be understood and looked at with science.
Yeah, definitely.
Because science is just a way of understanding things and a way of describing the things that we can see and touch and observe, measure.
Yeah. It was a nice touch in this film that the spectrals, the ghosts kind of things were, like you saw their reaction, like it wasn't just the monster in the dark, like many films do. Like you actually, very early on, that first scene that the main character bumps into them, like once he discovers, even though this thing's killing all the soldiers, he sees expression on its face, and we do too as the audience. And I thought, this is an interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, it was quite well sort of merged. It had a couple of good scenes, which we'll get to. So how about you, Mark? Is this a hope, a warning, or an experiment?
Well, I thought it was a warning too, because it's the premise of the film does set up that we're in war, and then the locals, there's the myth of the idea that these are actually, the dead souls because of war and they're stuck. And then on the other side, like the military, we're sort of saying, well, that's not the case. What are these things? Maybe they're a advanced military machine, camouflage, I think was being suggested for quite a while.
Camouflage.
So, but I think straight away you could sort of suggest, well, it's military, something's gone wrong here. What are these things? And again, being that the film was so based in it. So I do think warning. In looking into a bit of research, was actually the director Nic Mathieu. He actually said, well, it was a kind of cautionary tale. That was the idea. That was the promise of the premise that they set out to do for this story, was that, it's sort of suggesting military experiments go wrong, and so I feel, again, it is in that warning category.
I definitely have to agree, particularly because at the end, you've got the finale where they break into the lab.
Yep.
And all of the researchers are dead.
Yes.
And then at the very end, the final image of the scene is the CIA woman, Fran, telling Klein that they're going to deconstruct, reverse engineer. And basically she's not looking too hopeful about it either, going, well, we're just going to get more of this. There's danger here. So it leaves with a warning.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah.
You could say experiment because they're sort of entering a new field, but they're not really. The ending of it distinctly puts it in the warning category.
And I think, if you remember early in America with Klein and that, there's that sort of, he debates with his boss the ethics of science and
they developed why... energy weapon.
Yeah.
It's an energy device, the idea of using it to penetrate armor or freeze or flash boil water.
Yeah.
And then, of course, first thing the military guy says, have you used it on a living thing?
It was a great scene, that scene. That's one of my best scenes. We'll come back to that. But there's that ethical question from him when they do debate the spectrals and the camouflage, again, they're kind of debating, are these living things or are these soldiers?
Yeah.
And then you're right, like at the end, again, it's kind of a reminder of that question, because she goes, okay, now we're here and we're okay and we know what we're looking at. Let's keep it intact because we can use this ourselves, you know, we can use this technology. And he's like, you know, we've got to stop this now, as the ethical science question for the main character, you know. So I thought that was quite nice as well, overall with this film.
Yeah, a nice warning.
Warning, yes. I mean, to be honest, I think quite often science fiction, that's where it is good. It's a good, you know, long, hard look at ourselves and where we might head, an alternative to where we are, and even questioning maybe some of our current tactics, political, military, etc. And it's kind of like, we as humans can decide to go down that path, and here's a version of it.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally we have, I think, been a 50-50 mix between civilian and military use. Nuclear power, for example, sure, there was a bomb, but mind you, that was kind of dictated by the fact that coming to the end of the biggest war the world's ever seen.
Yeah.
But straight out of that came nuclear power, which, you know, reinvigorated war-torn countries that had suffered a lot of loss.
Yeah, definitely.
And they were able to get a lot of energy and electrical power to power their industry, get it back up and running very quickly.
Yeah.
So there's that sort of double side there. And
there always is, isn't there? Yeah.
I mean, the steel that people use to make weapons with are also used to make schools and hospitals.
Well, that's right.
And the technology research to find stronger steels helps you build better buildings or tools with less of it, as well as make better weapons.
And everyone listening to a podcast like this one, we're using the internet, which of course was developed by the US military. You know, so, you know, we got to cash in on these.
For playing online games.
That's right.
Mostly.
And Googling porn again. That's pretty much what we do. Or streaming Netflix movies like this one, Spectral.
Yeah, so let's have a bit of a brief overview of the plot. We sort of talked a bit about that. The director was Nic Mathieu.
Mathieu, yeah. I'm not too sure, to be honest.
Again, if Nick wants to call, you know, emails and let us know how to say whether it's Matthew or Matho.
Yep.
Or Matto.
Or even a listener could let us know.
Yeah,
we're mispronouncing wrong.
But if you're going to, just pretend that you're the director.
Pretend you're Nick.
It starred James Badgedale.
Yeah, he's the lead character, Dr. Klein.
He appeared in a number of other movies as secondary characters. I had who he was. Can't remember. There you go.
And Fran Madison was played by Emilymortimer, which I've seen her in a truckload of stuff.
Yeah, secondary characters.
Secondary characters.
Yeah.
I think she's been in a couple of kids' movies that maybe I've seen because of My Little Kitties. And then probably third, Bruce Greenwood, that's been around. Again, lots of secondary characters and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And this was a full-fledged Netflix film.
Yeah, $70 million budget. So, and you could tell it showed that.
Yep.
I was reading actually Universal originally had the rights and were going to release it in August of 2016. They, without disclosing why, canned it, and Netflix bought it.
Just bought the whole thing
for global distribution.
Yeah, right.
Which I think was a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good film with some good showing, but I think Universals of the world want to have like a star power in there.
That's right, yeah.
Had Tom Cruise been the lead role, or even if you had someone like Michael Biehn doing one of the military dudes, particularly one of the ones that died. It's Michael.
There is a lot of death very quickly. There is a lot of death quickly. And again, I don't know, maybe somewhere like Universal could be a bit like, is this a bit too risky straight away?
Yeah, there's also war-torn Eastern Europe.
Yeah, maybe politically for them, it's a bit risky compared to Netflix. So.
Good for the rest of us, though. We get a global release, and it's a half-decent film, so that's great.
Yeah, very good.
So the basic the plot, which I'll start off with, is we start off with a beautiful shot that looks extremely artistic. The color grading on it looks like almost computer graphics.
It does.
But actually it turns out they used on-location scenes with a lot of practical effects for this show.
Yeah.
Movie, not a show.
How old are you actually? Sorry, show.
a theatre production.
That's right.
So it has this Delta team, special forces fellow, moving in to search out a location where insurgents are hidden, and he decides not to wait for backup, and he moves in, and
he's a tough one. This guy.
He has his hyperspectral goggles on, so his night vision, fancy pants, slightly science fiction-y sort of goggles.
Yeah.
And he goes in and he finds the insurgents are dead. They sort of all seem to be killed. There's no bullet wounds, that sort of thing. And he enters the room, and the swirl of strange sort of blue light comes up and starts sort of moving oddly.
He reports it back to base.
And they tell him to have a look at it, see what it is. He pulls his mask up, his goggles up. He can't see it without the goggles.
You can't see it in the normal vision.
Puts the goggles back down, and then it launches into him. And I think we just see a bit of a face as it goes through him.
We do, just a tiny face. Yeah.
And that, of course, then leads us to, what's his first name? Michael Klein, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so that's, and he's a DARPA researcher, engineer.
DARPA, what
he's
a
over
great
in the
acronym.
States. He's putting together this energy demonstration where it flash melts a big block of ice, and the military guys watching say, shoot a living thing with this to find out what happens.
Yep.
My immediate response would be, bullets are a lot cheaper than fancy, energy weapons. And so he has a bit of a debate with his boss, who says, look, just shoot a side of beef if you want. Yeah. That's not really the problem. They pay our bills.
Yeah.
And he goes, no, I'm not really
they debate, that's what I meant before, like sort of debates. His boss says, well, Einstein worked for the government. He kind of quips back.
Einstein
probably didn't like that, or that's not what everyone remembers. And they're kind of debating that ethical question, aren't they?
Yeah, but it's pointed out then that he was the person who came up with the technology invention behind these goggles.
Yes.
And there's a request from a general in Moldova, I think they said.
Yeah.
But I only mentioned it once.
They do, yeah.
But it's some generic ex-USSR Eastern Bloc nation undergoing some sort of civil strife. I think we're just expected to lump it in there with the Sarajevos and the Ukraines.
The stands.
The stands that have had troubles at various times.
Yeah.
And, we've sort of got a bit of a memory of these things. So he goes along to that because he thinks, okay, the goggles, that's not a weapon. It's actually helping people. That's good. And I can advise. He sees this. He gets there. He meets the CIA analyst, Fran, who is there because obviously the CIA is concerned that the enemy have some sort of weapon or an advantage. And she's working on the idea that it's active camouflage, which is something that is being worked on by lots of people. A cloaking device, basically.
I'd imagine that would be.
And that has been done to select wavelengths of light.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is not as useful as you might like, but it's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
And he says, well, I need to have a closer look. So he gets lumped in with a Delta team. They all drive on these massive trucks, and he has a big camera that is a high sensitivity version of the goggles.
Yeah.
That he has to operate, which is why he's going in there, of course.
So he's like a big man on top of a military vehicle with a huge old kind of camera from the 1960s. That's what it sort of looks like.
Or a stage spotlight.
Yeah, it's this massive big thing,
barrel thing, So he goes there, and the Delta team invade. Is that the right term?
Yeah, I think so.
Breach.
Well, they're trying to go rescue a crew, aren't they?
Yeah,
another team.
A Delta team. Yeah. Another team has been
Team Utah.
Team Utah. They got pinned up in this building, so they're gonna bust in this building.
And they think the insurgents have taken them, so they believe in that they're being held captive by the insurgents.
But I think we all guessed that it wasn't.
Yeah, that's right. So we knew.
The team go in there and they find lots of dead bodies, insurgents and Utah. And they find there's a bit of a scary moment there where they find an overturned bathtub where they're told that something is moving in there.
Yeah.
And they flip it over, and it's like one of the last surviving members of the team. And he's telling crazy stories about how everyone's dead and we're all really dead and whatever. And sure enough, they come across one of these spectral, they call them hyperspectral anomalies.
Yes.
Ghost.
Yep.
And the ghost proceeds to kill lots of these guys.
running through them. As soon as it runs at them and touches them, they're basically just out cold. They're dead. And they're frozen as well, aren't they? That's the other thing. Their organs are frozen from the inside out. So just it's a killer death. Instant. These highly trained soldiers are just down.
Yeah, these poor fellas. And then, so they bust out and they come climbing out in a big ordered retreat. Panic. Let's face it, they're being chased by something they can't really see.
Yeah.
They try shooting.
Klein straight away is saying, "Get them out, get them out, get them out." You know,
reminiscent of Ripley in Aliens.
Whereas the captain's like, "Keep going, keep going." Oh crap! Get out, get out, get out. And it's kind of a bit.
And the
too
analyst
late.
says, "Oh, we can't leave until we've got something."
Yeah.
If you can't leave empty-handed, you go, "Well, you're crazy!" Like 9 people have just been instantly killed.
You've had a whole team of soldiers already dead, and then you've had another 9 of your current soldiers die in front of you with this thing attacking you, and you don't want to retreat.
Yeah, so Klein gets his camera going because I think he's also of the opinion that he doesn't want to leave without getting information because this is probably the last chance he's going to get. So he gets his camera out, has a bit of trouble with it, and manages to hook it up and sees this spectre come out. And we see a pretty good look at it. It's distinctly humanoid or a person. It sort of moves with flowing effects around it, blurring around it as it moves, but it looks at him.
Yes.
And you can see it's a human face and it has an expression.
Yeah, so it's quite scary, quite creepy.
Then his buddy runs in and shoots a rocket launcher at it, which
blows everything.
It blows a lot of stuff up. It doesn't hurt the spectral being, which then kills Klein's friend.
Yep.
So they finally, all the soldiers are back in their trucks.
Yep.
And they hightail it out of there. As you'd expect, they got home safely. They found it was all just a dream and went back to America.
The end. Happily ever after.
They hit some landmines.
They do. They hit landmines all the time.
Trucks in the middle of the heaviest insurgent-held location.
They're stuck in there, yep.
And so they had to run out of their trucks and they get chased by... Well, they don't actually... I don't think...
They're not being chased, but the impression is we're in a danger zone. So
they're hurrying. They're moving with
it's a war
some
zone.
Speed into a factory.
Yep.
Where they go piling on in there and they
sort of have a chance to regather.
They see out the window that there's something going on out in the field and they have a look. They're looking through the camera, aren't they?
Yes.
And they can see there's a whole bunch of these spectres coming up, but they're getting stuck on this strange black sand.
Yeah.
And one of the guys says, I fell over and then I was picking it out of my hand. So they look at his hand and they find iron filings.
Yeah.
There's this great big trail of iron filings all the way around the perimeter of the factory.
Mm.
And the Spectral seem to be having trouble. It's obviously some sort of magnetic effect. It sticks to them.
It's stopping them in their tracks,
They don't seem... I don't know if it's hurting them as such, but it's discomforting them in some way and they get stuck and they can't move through it. So that's when they realise that somebody put that barrier down. So they search the factory and they find a couple of kids, as you'd expect. This is just a way of raising the stakes, making it a little bit more personal. Because so far you've just had a few nameless soldiers who are wearing face masks.
Yeah,
really, we don't even know who they are. There's just that one friend of Klein's who sort of died, but we didn't really know him very well much either. So now we've got a couple of kids in the mix. All of a sudden now the soldiers are sort of, I suppose, seeing a personal side to it. They're not just trying to get out now for some military objective. They're trying to get out now because they've got a couple of youngsters that they sort of joke around with and come to like in the 10 minutes that they're in there. So they spend the night there and they decide to make little iron filing bombs. So they repurpose their grenades and other bits of explosives and so forth to make sort of iron filing packed pipe bombs.
I liked that. It was, and I think one of them said "dirty bombs."
Yeah,
it was a great line. I was like, yeah, but it's kind of one of those exciting moments, you know. It's like
an A-team.
It is. I like that. You know, we've seen that a lot in a lot of movies. You know, it's like coming together to defeat an unknown enemy, but then here's just something that might slow them down, and it's off kilter. You know.
Bit of hope, yeah.
And you see them all in that montage, and they build all those dirty bombs, and then when they actually managed to alter the guns. I was impressed by that.
I think that was their grenade launchers. So they pulled the grenades out and stuck. I'm not sure the technicalities of that.
I wasn't too sure, because you saw them in the factory get all the glass jars, and it was like, oh yeah, cool, like little dirty bombs that they'll throw, but then all of a sudden they were shooting them out of their guns.
Yeah, they pulled their grenades apart to make these glass jar ones, but then they seem to have managed to redo their M203 slung grenade launchers.
I'm not a gun expert, but somehow they were firing them out of their guns.
I don't know. Yeah. It's one of those things. It makes for a good story.
It does. Yeah. It's exciting to watch. It is. It
gives them something. Otherwise, because they were shooting and nothing's happening.
Nothing. That's it.
So we had to have some sort of effect. They organise in an escape, but they have to broadcast their position, which they sort of go, well, we kind of have to do it because what are we going to do? Sit here all day?
Yep.
And in the morning, they've turned their camera also. There's another funny thing, into like a searchlight somehow.
Yeah. He pulls it apart.
He actually said, "I'm going to reverse the polarity."
He did. Yeah.
If that's not one of the greatest sci-fi lines to use.
And he shrinks it a bit, I think, doesn't he? It's kind of this huge lumping thing that he's walking around with, but then it's still big, but he makes it a bit more transportable.
Yeah,
a bit sexier, a little bit smaller.
He's a powerful, as I said, he's a scientist engineer.
Yeah, he's doing stuff we don't get.
He can do the whole lot. So they turn it into a searchlight so they can actually see these things.
Yeah.
And they make their run out through the streets, and there's this running chase as spectres come zooming out of windows.
And they're like jumping the power poles and stuff. Like, that's a really cool moment.
They said they are affected by gravity, but not very
the same.
Much, it seems. Yeah.
And you mentioned before, there's a nice reverberation behind them in light. Like, they sort of jump, but it's almost like, it's like you're seeing a shadow of a light jump. It's cool.
Yeah, and they rush through and they come across the courtyard where they're supposed to be evacuated from. They're just starting to get worried. These monsters ganging up around the edges. And then in rolls the tanks, and they've set up these big spotlights, which apparently he's able to teach them how to do it.
Well, his torch stops. That's what happens, doesn't it?
Oh,
he's like, we're blind.
And then the tanks roll in these big searchlights, which highlight these spectres.
Them all, and they're surrounded by them.
And they shoot their tank guns off, and soldiers come running and shooting, which is kind of pointless.
Very pointless.
But one of the spectres comes running to go through the tank, and it crashes into the armour and bounces off.
Yeah.
And knocks the tank around a fair bit, but can't get through. And it sort of seems to be struggling like it does with iron.
Yeah.
It still totally smashes the tank to bits, but it has to hammer it on the outside rather than just go inside and freeze everyone. But the helicopter comes down, and interestingly enough, the helicopter backdraft, the wind coming out of the blades, slows these guys down, and they're having trouble advancing against the wind. So that would explain why gravity doesn't affect them as much. They're clearly made of something very lightweight.
Yes.
Able to be transported with enough force to smash a tank, but can't go against wind.
Yeah.
I'm sure that works out somehow. But the cool part is old Michael Klein smashes all these glass jars of iron filings.
Yeah.
And the wind from
flies them into them. So
from the helicopter sort of flies into them, and they all get knocked back, and they manage to escape on the helicopter.
Yeah.
Whew, there's a lot of action there.
There was a lot of action. And then those helicopters, they think they're getting back to base, but they don't. They drop them off at this weird insurgent kind of place.
Yeah.
And it's actually a sort of a sanctuary or something for the civilians, like a tunnel. And they have a little moment with the guards, but then they're allowed in, and they start talking about, what to do next. What do we need to regroup? We need to gather what's going on. And the girl, she's injured as well, so she's going to have surgery. And she talks about her father dying in that scene.
Yeah.
Because the father was the one that did the iron barrier at the building. And she tells them that, her father told her through this little piece of paper, which is like a map of the city, that these spectres came from the power plant. That's sort of where they started appearing from to begin with. A time period ago, whatever, and then they've sort of been growing out from there exponentially. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when the general arrives.
Yep.
And they think, right, reinforcements will
We're
be
gonna be
saved.
saved.
No, it turns out he's only turned up with one platoon of men and
a couple of sea containers out of the sky.
some equipment and stuff that he managed to scrounge
I'm
up.
not too sure where they came from, but some of these huge sea containers land.
I guess whatever, it's just explained that they were
the equipment they could
most
grab.
of the forces were retreating out of the combat zone, but he came out with a platoon to sort of
We'll head this way,
and there's this moment of hope. Oh, great! Well, let's just get out of here.
Yeah.
They've only got 20 minutes of flight time. They just don't have much there.
Yep.
And it's about this time when everyone's feeling the most doom and gloom that the scientist suddenly has a brainwave.
He does. He has a real aha.
Which is an incredible jump he made. But I think it was sort of explained a bit by his earlier appearance working with high energy devices and lasers. And they didn't say it was a laser, it was various sort of energy weapony type things. Yeah. Which meant, I'm guessing that's where he got his insight from. So he said these spectres are a different state of matter, an artificial or unnatural state of matter, which is man-made and would need a lot of power, which would explain the power plant. Yeah. They called it a Bose-Einstein condensate.
He did.
And I didn't really say much more about that except to say that it was a different state of matter which would be stopped by ceramic.
Ceramic's an option,
be cold,
and that's why the guy in the bath survived in the bath, because of the ceramic bath. Yeah, I thought it was a huge aha, but it made it kind of, there was a major payoff for the fact that our hero in this story was and is a special scientist. Like, this is his field. Yeah, so it's sort of the payoff for the whole thing, because he's not really the action hero. He's a tough guy and he survives in the field with the soldiers, but he's not the guy blowing them apart and stuff. There's other soldiers doing that, in the story. Yeah. And I think in that moment, there's enough of, like I'd gone along the story enough that I was like, this was a believable aha, like I thought it was totally accurate that here's a guy, a scientist, and because he breaks it down as though he's like, well, if this is the case, they have to be man-made. And that's the aha, isn't it? It's like they're not ghosts, they're man-made. Yeah. And I think Fran is still going on about the camouflage at this point in time. He's like, no, and even the soldiers are like, no, not the camouflage again.
Camouflage,
we know it's not the camouflage.
Run through walls.
Yeah, because I think in that scene by memory, one of the soldiers said, well, no, camouflage wouldn't take a whole array of my bullets or something like it. The soldier's the one that answers that question. Yeah. So I think they did do well, like Klein being the scientist, being that this was sort of, we know he's dealt with the UV rays and the positivity of light, and he disassembled that light ray, and this is his field, and he's sort of like, he comes out, and I think he does quote Einstein, doesn't he, earlier in the film, so it's kind of a little bit of a strong enough connection to it.
It's nice though that for me it was like, okay, that's good. I'm glad they didn't go down, they just are ghosts.
That's right, yeah.
Because in a way, in fact, they are ghosts.
Yeah, they are.
As they point out at the end here, when they use the equipment they got to manufacture some more weapons, and they stuck the searchlights on top of their robot dogs.
Yes. That was like awesome, that robot dog thing, actually.
Yeah, have you seen the videos of those? The Boston Dynamics
Oh, yes,
dog?
Yeah, that's cool.
It's a freaky looking thing jogging along. So, I mean, this was a slightly more science fiction advanced version. Yeah. But the whole movie is slightly more advanced. Yeah. And so they gear up, basically, a whole bunch of these...
Because now they've got the plan. Now they know what they have to do.
It is these plasma weapons, and they jump in their helicopters and get to the power station. There's a big showdown then where they are being charged by the spectres, and they're setting up this, like, big gun. Yep. And they're plugging in... look like camera batteries. Yeah. They probably are, they are some sort of batteries from their field equipment. Yeah. They're plugging it in and they line it up, and then kapow, this huge explosion, and everyone's sort of knocked around, and this spectre is diffused. Yes. And so they go, woo, it works.
It works.
And they land all their soldiers down and start storming. Yep. Which I thought was like, well, you've got helicopters, why wouldn't you just like fly to where you need to be? Luckily, that's exactly what they did.
That's right.
So that was just a diversionary tactic, which pleased me no end, because it would have just seemed silly. Why just start so far away?
That's right.
And slowly march forward, which is the 1600s.
Yeah.
So, they dropped off the...
You can at least get 20 minutes closer. That's what we were told. Those helicopters can go 20 minutes. So, come on.
Well, so instead, the scientist fellow and the core team of Delta team who was with initially, they get dropped off right in the
heart
guts.
of it, yeah.
And they go down and they get split up when they encounter a spectre, but they into two different groups. So Klein and Madison, the CIA agent, they got off on their own, and they found their way into the lab where the spectres are being created. And they go through and they discover that they were like almost 3D printing these critters. And they go, this is terrible. We've got to find a way of turning this off.
Yep.
And they walk through into the next part and they find what reminded me of the Lego movie Think Tank. It's like, or maybe you could say Matrix, but I thought Think Tank. So it's a great big vault filled with glass-fronted sarcophagus.
Yeah.
And in each one of them was one of these spectres in a miserable and unhappy state.
Yep.
But a whole bunch of them have been cracked open by seismic activity or warfare or whatever. And these spectres had escaped, and all the scientists were dead.
Yeah, everyone working.
Clearly, it was a weapon that got out of control.
Yep.
And they have to unplug there's like some instructions. They found the dead scientist was on his way to turn it off, but had died, and they found the instruction manual which said you got to unplug these things and pull a lever.
Yeah.
And long story short, with the usual, dramatics and
there's the tension. There's the tension between the soldiers fighting to their death and them sort of heading to unplug them.
As they're going along to do this unplugging, we find that the soldiers are shooting down the spectres, and the spectres are disincorporating.
Yeah.
But then they start
reincorporating.
They start coming back again. So
they're it's a losing battle.
Yeah, and then they're
not getting anywhere.
They're on the back foot now.
Yeah. And then Fran wants to keep them.
Yeah,
Fran's like, well, we're here now. Why don't we keep a few of them? We can use this technology. So it's kind of, it's that tension building, isn't it?
And they managed to unplug these plugs and pull the thing just at the last moment.
That's right.
And that basically ends the spectres. They sort of freeze in motion and just slowly drift and dissipate.
Yeah.
And, it's quite a dramatic and quiet moment.
It is.
And then they find where these people were controlling the spectres from, or they're just the central nervous systems of people in these, again, sarcophagus on the ground. And Klein says, oh, look, they're in pain. We should pull a plug on them. And Madison says, how do you know? And he just kind of gives you a bit of a look and looks down and says, that's pain. I would have said, all they are is a central nervous system.
That's right.
All they can do is feel pain.
That's right.
At this stage. That's
and
all they got.
I think he has a line, something like, which was really quite nice. They're not here and they're not there. Like they're in between.
He brings back that war ghost.
That's right. So
and somewhere between life and death.
Yeah.
I don't think they actually said it, but
no.
I wanted to say, and they were created out of war.
That's right.
So anyway,
it's kind of time to let them go.
Pull the plug on them and they dissolve. And they said everyone meets back at the base and they have that sort of, that's all done, and the soldiers are kitting back up to go back out in the field.
I suppose back to the insurgents.
Like war machines they are.
Yeah.
And then that's when Fran says that they're disassembling and deconstructing everything and figuring out, measuring it all. And our hero gets in a chopper and flies off. And we're left with that feeling of, are they just going to have this exact same problem occur again? Or, I don't know. Yeah,
I think I agree. Like the feeling at the end of the film was a bit like, it's probably just going to happen again, like another war, or that again. I suppose that idea of a warning, isn't it? That this is what happens because of war.
Yeah. At what point, at the point where you devalue human life and experience to the point where it's just a weapon.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they sort of made a bit of a comparison though with the Delta Force soldiers who just immediately re-equipping and going back to it, and he makes a point that they just don't stop, do they?
No. Yeah.
And you sort of go, well. Yeah,
that's a soldier.
They've just been turned into weapons, and they just keep rolling on until they're ended.
That's it. Yep. For them, that's everything. It's just being a soldier.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, really.
War doesn't solve everything.
Actually, one of the actors in there, what's his name? It's like Max. I can't remember his name. So he's one of the soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at his previous roles, all soldiers. He's a sergeant in this one. He's a lieutenant in that one. But it's just like, okay, that's his niche, and he's just like a whole lot of movies where he's a soldier, and a documentary series and a soldier.
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, a couple of those soldiers that in that group, in that Delta Force, I mean, they were freaking soldiers, weren't they? I mean, they were buff.
They totally looked it.
They totally looked it. Their face, their eyes. I felt like I'd seen them as soldiers. Like, I don't know, like that's probably it. And that's what they do in a lot of casting anyway. They're like, well, you've been a soldier before, you can be a soldier again. Like, and a lot of actors talk about that, like the typecasting, don't they?
It happens in most places. Certainly in IT, I work heavily with one particular technology. I go for another contract, and it's really difficult to get out of that because people look and they go, "Oh, you've got 10 years experience doing that." Yes, but I really want to learn this other stuff. Yeah, but we're paying you, and we want you to do the thing that you do really good.
That's very true.
Do that good thing, please.
You were so good as a soldier number 3 in Predator, so why don't you be a soldier number 3 in Spectral? Okay.
We'll give you a few
more. It's been 20 years in between, people. Or 30, whatever it is.
A few extra lines to say.
Yeah, this time you got a few lines.
Yeah. Well, I guess you get a job and you get paid, so...
That's right.
It's probably fun too.
Yeah, I'd say it'd be fun. It'd be fun to do all these things.
Okay, so viewing experience. How did you go about watching this? Library by yourself?
No, I actually watched this with my wife recently, before this recording, very recently. A little bit left to the late minute for this one. So I got to see it on the big screen, and we both sat through it, and it was very, we both enjoyed it. I think we sort of freaked out a couple of those moments, and then also kind of cheered them on in other moments. So it was a pretty straightforward, just viewing it. I didn't. I think overall this particular film, I'm sort of leaning it a bit more towards action. If I don't know what you're thinking, but the crux of the story is very sciencey, like a science fiction should, and then it's also a little bit horror because it's ghost. But being the military side of it and the weaponry, but even the way, and I'll talk a bit about this later, but even the way the film was shot, it was very much like an action film, like a game, really, like a shooter game to me. Like, sure. It was very intense, those action moments. They didn't hold back from the guns and the tanks and the explosions and all that.
The director was an advertisement, commercial director before. Right. This is his first feature film.
This is his first film, I saw
and
that.
I'm wondering, I haven't looked up to see what commercials he's done, but I got the feeling that he's done car commercial, some of the way the shots,
a lot of quick, slick,
and the way that the camera would move. There's one scene where Klein is walking through the DARPA offices, and the pan's following along, and then it sort of stops, and as he walks towards it, it rotates to follow him. He enters the corridor, then it follows him behind the corridor, just very one smooth shot. Very reminded me of those sort of car commercials where someone's getting their gear together and getting into a car, and that the camera's always moving to give you that sense of motion. But it's also a very Michael Bay type of thing. He's very fond of camera moving, then something in the background moving the opposite direction, and the actors moving in the other direction. So you sort of get these parallax layers of motion going on. So it's sort of that sort of film which definitely lends that action.
Yeah, it felt more actiony to me than definitely any of the films we've been analysing so far for Space Brains. And so I think just the feeling the film gave my wife and I was just a bit more high intensity that way, and it did feel like I was watching, kind of felt like I was watching a bit of a point of view shooter game in a way, unfolding, obviously not playing it, but just being more involved. And a lot of that, action sequence with the camera. We were involved in that war, and the way the soldiers reacted to the ghosts kind of thing, I mean, and that's the thing, even with the ghosts, I suppose if you take Alien, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, again, the ghosts could have been shot just enough to kind of be really creepy. But this film, there was a creepier element, but pretty quickly it was more, I would say, in the open, of what the ghost was.
It was just
it was a blatant
horde of them sort of shooting along through the streets.
So it wasn't so much scary. It was you were worried about who's going to die and are they going to get them in that moment, but it was more in that action, a big bunch of bad guys coming at them with weapons as well, so it's kind of more a standoff situation. So it's not a bad thing at all, but to me it just felt that's right. Yeah, no, so just it felt more like a big bad action film. How about you? How was your experience?
Yeah, same thing. Watched it the other night with my wife. We're watching. I knew it had a nice mix of action and suspense
because you'd seen this before, right?
Yeah, quite a while ago. Yeah, and my wife was holding a hand up to block the view. She can't take suspense. So I knew there must have been some tension in there. I think I'm less sensitive.
Yes. Yeah.
For whatever reason, there's been a couple of movies that have had me on edge. There was one in particular, the I Am Legend, when his dog has run into the thing and he's looking for his dog.
Oh God!
Because I knew that they weren't going to kill him.
Yeah.
But his poor dog, I didn't want to see the poor dog suffer.
No, we shouldn't spoil it anyway. Sorry, maybe that's a film for. Yeah, that is a. Awful
but so watch that, and it's the same sort of thing. There was quiet, and then there's like when they're loading up all the weapons, it's like, oh yeah, they should do this. Yeah, they should do that. Oh yeah, they should. Yeah. Why aren't they doing that? Oh my goodness, that sort of. Getting, like so, you're getting sort of involved in it. Yeah. And you feel as if. And
even like you said before, with the plot point of them escaping, and then they're in their tanks, and then landmines. It's like boom. Now your trucks are done. You're stuffed. Now you got to go on foot, and then they're on foot, and we've been told they're in the war torn. They're right in the thick of it. So it's like There's no breathing space in the film, I suppose. Yeah, in that way.
Oh, well, that's going to bring me to my best scene.
Okay.
Best scene, for a total sort of scene, it's that escape from the factory through to the courtyard.
Yep.
That I think was very, very exciting. Yep. It was sort of on edge, and they had their grenades that they were using to
the dirty bombs.
Try and slow them down. And so you got this feeling that if they just get like a good shot in there, they could really get some advantage here. And they never quite got the shot in. They got a couple there where the Spectres got held back.
Yeah.
Then one of the guys gets killed, but you had the really strong feeling of a flowing chase with this enemy which just kept
coming at them,
flying out of windows and doors and around corners. And it was only illuminated by the light. So the spotlight would move about the place, so you'd see a whole bunch down the street, and it would swing back away, and it would come back. And then they've moved, and they're in all the different spots. And so it was a great sort of charge down into that central courtyard where they're then left without their light. Yeah. And they can't see it, and it sort of goes a bit quiet.
Yep.
And they're like, well, we're blind, we can't see what's going on. All up to there, it was very good. So it really had a good balance of, as I said, they've got some ability to affect them, but it's not enough.
Yep.
But is it enough for them to get out? Because they're dragging these two kids along.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the kids unfortunately does die, which I think is designed to really ramp up that tension and bring that
the truth of it. Yeah.
That sort of horror of the situation. It's not just sort of fun and games. They're not really safe. Yep. Yeah. So that was my best scene.
Yeah.
An honourable mention, though, actually, is just the opening scene where we see the overpass and the trash cars.
Yeah, it's beautiful, wasn't it? That?
And these guys, this one person just walking through there, it really they're so beautiful to look at, and it really set the scene. You immediately knew it was, a war-torn European place because of the architecture, and at the same time you could tell it was a bit futuristic because of the colour grading. It had that sort of bluey greys.
It did the cold again. Yeah, cold.
Sort of an intensity to it. Yeah. Which rather than that sort of greys and dusty reds which you might get with a modern time, modern setting. And the other scene was they're approaching the power station. Mm-hmm. It's just it's just beautiful concrete, sort of almost frightening looking mass.
Yep.
With these strange prongs out into the
it's cool, that power plant, actually. You've sort of reminded me.
It just looks like almost like a spaceship.
It did, didn't it? Yeah.
It was just like such a beautiful. Apparently, most of that is all real.
Yeah.
It's only been sort of touched up and highlighted a bit.
Yeah.
So
No, I saw that myself looking at it, that they shot this in Budapest, Hungary. And they did rely a lot on using those settings. And you've mentioned it, like bringing in props and stuff. So, which surprised me a little bit because it felt like when I was watching it, I was impressed by the cityscape and that. But I thought, probably a chunk of this is digital. But no, like they actually did pull it off. Yeah, so obviously that's where all that money went.
Yeah,
that you were talking about before, because they didn't use big actors and stuff like that. I loved, as you're saying, that chase scene, but when they did, and we've talked about it pretty heavily, the courtyard scene. And the reason I think I loved it more than anything was, so they're all, all those spectres are coming in, and they're kind of like, his light goes out, and so it's a nice moment where he says to the captain, we're in the dark, we're blind, and you sort of think, yeah, you're fighting a creature that you need those glasses. And then the big tank rolls in, and because he relayed back to base, you need these lights to see them. It's got a massive torch on it, and so all of a sudden they're surrounded in that courtyard. And it's a beautiful old courtyard, isn't it? It's like got a big water fountain in the middle. I was really taken in with soldiers on horses. Yeah. There's like 4 soldiers. And of course, this thing then starts getting blown apart, the statues and stuff. And it's that real, it's like World War II. It reminds me of those World War II movies where, there's a big sniper shootout in a courtyard or something like that. So I really liked that. But then I did also like the Spectre, he bowls into a tank, and the tank starts getting flung around, but he's also getting flung backwards. But we do see...
looking confused.
Yeah, his face is like, why isn't my power working, And I think that was a nice touch, like I said earlier, like when we first see the very first Spectre as well, he's killed all these soldiers, he's come down, and we see his face, like when Klein sees his face, and he's kind of like, oh, what's going on here? Like these guys have characters, and again, it's implying that they are people pretty early on. They're not creatures, there's something, there's something else. So I liked that tank scene. I thought that was a pretty cool scene. And you mentioned as well that I was thinking they're not getting out of here. And then when the helicopters come, the whoosh of the helicopters, the force is holding them back. And Klein does a pretty cool thing with finally the dirty bomb, where he just kind of like implodes it. He throws his whole rack off, doesn't he? He pulls his whole belt off. That reminded me of a 1980s action film. Hey, like just unbuckling a belt with 10 grenades on it. You go, take this, take this, motherfuckers, and you just throw it into them, sort of thing. And again, that explosion of the iron filters, which is pretty cool. And I think you'll probably talk a bit about the science in a moment, but yeah, that is the science of this science, isn't it? The iron is a key element to it. We have mentioned obviously towards the climax of the film, but yeah, I think to me, I described it that scene where they do find the humans and their nerve centers. It's 3D printers. That's what it's kind of like.
Yeah, they had that little robotic arm thing.
It's
seemed to
doing
be
something.
placing everything, and slowly there's like a half a Spectre that's
so gross
growing
on one level, and on another, I was really like, wow, that's cool. That's really cool. And I liked that. Again, Fran was kind of like, oh, let's keep this.
Yeah, this is so
and
cool.
He's like, no, like they're not in between these. This is ugly. This is horrific.
Well, I think initially they were thinking it was a manufactured thing.
Yeah,
and then he finds the scan.
Yeah, he's seeing files of people, isn't he?
They're scanning people, and then they go down and see the box, and they go, oh, they're not just... They didn't just take photographs of people and then recreate them.
These are the people.
These are the people.
Yeah. And because you mentioned before as well, when we see the glass prison where some have escaped and some... Like, the Spectres they're in there. They're locked in, and these were just normal people. They're war
you can
victims.
See them.
And they're pissed off and they're angry and they're frustrated. I mean, they've been locked away for who knows how long. So I liked that that they were in there, and that whole little sequence was kind of a nice revealing at that moment. And then the other thing which we sort of mentioned as well before is just very early at the American science lab, and when we have that, Klein shows his experiment off, the ice turns to water, and the DOD official says, can you try this on living things? And he replies, that wasn't our intent here. He said, well, we'd like you to test it. And he says, any volunteers?
Yeah, any volunteers, that's a good one.
It was such a good line from...
No, they'd be hideously painful.
Yeah, and they sort of they chuckle because they're you know, they're the higher up politicians, military, whatever they are. I really liked that scene because a lot of films, we do have that ethical debate, but it's that particular, in this film, that scene, you know, we're on Klein's side and we're kind of like, yeah, right. So his bosses are sort of saying, yeah, come on, use this, you know, like, yeah, come on, blow up a person. We want to see this blow up a person. What does it do to a person? You know, so, and him quipping like that was really nice, I thought. So even though that was very early in the film, I liked that. That was a scene that kind of went boom to me.
Yeah. Did you have any worst scenes? I'm trying to think. I don't think there was really worst scenes. There was a head scratcher for me, which I understand why it was put in there. When they're all going off for the final battle, they're taking off the helicopters and the camera swings back and we see the general standing there looking stoic and proud or whatever, and the refugee girl.
Yeah.
And she gets a strange little smile and he's like, why is she out with the general?
Yeah, no,
like,
there's no connection there, is there? No. Yeah.
I mean, the reason I can think of to do it from a story point of view is to remind the audience
those two
that
are staying.
It's not just a military thing, it's also a person.
Yeah, yeah.
There's this real connection there. But I could also just sort of imagine that was like, and that was when she knew she would be president. You know, that's sort of what it looked like. She sort of, the look she gave, so like, that's if there's a sequel, she's going to be a leader in the sequel, I tell you.
The one scene I just was like, I didn't like. Very early when he arrives at the base, the Delta crew, so it's like, oh, here's the doctor, the scientist, and here's the soldiers.
Yeah.
And straight away the soldiers are like, all up in his grill, you know, like we're soldiers, you're a nerd.
You're messing
with
our stuff.
You've ripped off I think he had taken off a weapon off the tank, kind of whatever that truck tank thing was, whatever you call them, and he'd been putting on his big light camera thing, his 1970s TV camera, and so he was placing that all out. But they got in his face like it was high school, like the jocks and the nerd, and it was very stereotypical. But even that wasn't too bad. But then the captain came in, and he's all protective of Klein.
Yeah.
But the way he did that, and look, this is just writers being writers, but he unleashed a verbal spray of why we should respect Klein. And to me, it just went on for way too long. Like he's saying, those goggles, they saved your life. They've saved your lives 100 times. He's the one that invented them. And that armor that's protecting your junk, he made that junk. And it's like, and this light he's put on the tank's going to see, you know, and it went on for about 5 minutes. It was a 5-minute speech. And I just was kind of sitting there by the end of going, oh, so you've just told me everything about Dr. Klein, you know, like it was a bit too obvious for me.
There's also to introduce him as a friend who's worked with him before. And so when he dies later on,
there's a
but
feeling.
There was kind of nothing there
when he did die, because you're freaking out.
It took me a little while to realise who it was.
Yeah. So, to be honest, because he was all wrapped up.
I thought it was just some random dude with a rocket launcher, but
that's cool, you know. But the rest of the film, I didn't feel any other scenes stood out to me too much, but. As scenes I didn't like, but just that one, it just kind of starts to make your skin crawl. You think, come on, you got to hide a bit of that in there, you know? And it could have been revealed in different ways. So, Surrey, this film is based on some real damn science, Einstein.
Well, you're kind of real science. It is science fiction.
It is fiction, of course.
Well, the really cool thing they do talk about, which is very exciting, is the Bose-Einstein condensate, which is you could say, It's probably occurs naturally somewhere, but not anywhere that we are going to go. So the basis of it is if you take a particular type of particle, and they're called bosons. An example of a boson, for example, would be deuterium, which is 1 proton and 1 neutron. So that's helium-2. And you cool that. It also covers like photons and the Higgs boson, which gives mass, and the gluons, which with the strong nuclear force. But in something that we can actually work with, well, let's talk about helium. And if you cool it down, and you cool it down in a near vacuum, so we're talking about 1/1000th of, it's basically as close to a perfect vacuum as you can get a hold of. But you've got a few of these atoms. The important thing is, when you're cooling it down, normally if you cool down atoms, they don't move much because they get colder. Like, heat is basically kinetic energy of an atom. And if there's too close together, they'll bump into each other and they'll tend to hang around each other, and then they'll condense into a liquid and then a solid, and you'll get, liquid helium, solid helium. That's not what you want, because that's useless to us. But if you have it in a sparse enough vacuum, these atoms don't get a chance to form into liquids or solids. A very interesting thing happens at very close to absolute zero. So absolute zero is, if you were to say take an atom and you measured how energetic it was, that's basically its temperature. And if you reduce the temperature, then you can graph out how much it moves around, how energetic it is at each point. And then if you take a ruler and draw a line through that, you'll get one end of it going upward to superheated, like plasma type stuff. And the other end of the line will drop down until its energy state is zero. So it'll cease to exist because it just simply won't be energy anymore. So that's what absolute zero is. So you cool something down to very close to absolute zero in a vacuum. And the very exciting thing that happens at this state is, in an absolute vacuum, there's not really an absolute vacuum. You've got the 0 point energy is actually an average energy.
Right.
So you could imagine we're talking about an atom, and it vibrates slightly, moves from one energy state to another. And if you get it close enough to zero, it might be at plus 0.1 degree Kelvin and -1. And it'll swap between these states. And at -1, it doesn't exist. It's not there. It's gone. And so you can end up then with an atom or a particle whose quantum field waveform, which describes its position and energy, is fluctuating between existence and non-existence, and its average probability field, its size, encompasses the other atoms you have. So it just sort of flattens out until they're, rather than interacting on the macro scale, which is where we normally have Newtonian physics, they're interacting only at the quantum level.
Right.
So their waveforms can be viewed then as a single quantum field of existence. At any given time, half of it will be in state 1, which might be positive, half the state 0, which is negative. So you end up with this very weird state of matter which shares a single quantum field, but over a macro scale. Normally we're talking quantum effects down at electron level type of thing, but this could be in a box, or in the case of the movie, some sort of a prison. And being that it has this one shared quantum field, well, what does that mean when we're talking about observability? And this is, I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. But I guess what they're going in here with is the ability then to sort of project a human consciousness into this condensate.
Yeah.
Which leads me to the other bit of connecting research, which is kind of a bit speculative, but it's gaining research, regaining data, and that's called quantum consciousness. So quantum consciousness then is a theory. It's actually called OR or something. I can't remember what that exact stands for, but the theory is this fellow Hameroff. He's this American anesthetist, or anesthesiologist as they call it, and neuroscientist. He's heavily studied basically removing people's consciousness. That's what anesthetists do when you go into a general. And he says this is a very interesting state because it's not like sleep. In sleep, if you stimulate the body, you can still detect reaction in the mind. The brain is still doing stuff. Yeah, you can wake someone up, for example.
Yeah.
When someone is properly anesthetized, they do not have consciousness. They don't have a sense of time passing. And I've been under general, and sure enough, you know stuff is happening, and then just everything starts at a later time.
That's right.
Whereas when you go to sleep, you wake up and you have a sense of time having passed.
You do, don't you?
Because it's not unconsciousness when you're asleep. It's actually just an altered consciousness. But anesthetists actually make you totally unconscious. So he's going, well, what is it then? How is it that these drugs can remove consciousness? So what is consciousness? And his theory basically goes along the lines of that consciousness is, shall we say, a side effect of quantum waveform collapse. So a typical quantum physicist might say that we don't know a final state of something until we observe it, and then it will collapse to being into a particular. We'll be able to observe its location. Maybe Schrodinger's cat, we don't know if it's alive or dead until we open the box and look. Now we know whether it's alive or dead. It's Hameroff, and he's teamed up with a theoretical physicist, a mathematical physicist of some considerable brain power. It's orchestrated objective reduction, that's what the ORCOR is. Roger Penrose. And they've come together and they've said, well, what if it's the other way around? What if it's not your observation that causes the wavefront to collapse, but rather the wavefront collapsing causes consciousness or observation? The problem with this would be we'd need to have some sort of a structure in our body and our brain able to observe quantum events. Mm-hmm. And so this was a big pile of magic at the time. He's putting it together through the 80s and 90s and things. But more recently, they've discovered we've got these things, microtubules. So in our brain cells, we've got the main body, and then we've got the axon, which goes along, which one's the axon and dendrite. But you've got the little sticky outy bits which transmit, and then there's a synaptic gap where electrolytes, ions travel across to transmit messages. And the typical view is that's what causes our brains to function. And we can sort of map that, and we've got computer programs to simulate a certain amount of that, but it doesn't tell us about consciousness. Inside those structures, wrapping the cords are these microtubules. The microtubules also then form sort of the skeletal makeup, if you like, of cells, even down to bacteria. One thing they're looking at, for example, as an example, is the, what's it called? Paracilium? I'm going to get that wrong. Let's just say a single cell amoeba. Obviously, it's got no brain, it's got no central nervous system, it's just a cell, but it moves, it eats, it reproduces, it moves away from danger, moves towards food. It's making decisions, it's responding to its environment. So what structure would allow it to do this? And it's got lots of little cilia, which are actually made of these microtubules, which are about 25 micrometers across. So they're small enough that we're looking at individual molecules of things passing through them and quantum effects. And there's some research, for example, which has shown, and it's not been fully reproduced or peer-reviewed, but it shows it acts as a form of semiconductor, like a computer. So it will become very conductive or very resistive preceding and post-seeding synaptic events, which who knows what that really means. But the point is that it is interacting. So it will do something and seemingly cause the synapses to fire. And the vice versa, a synapse will seem to cause this to change its electrical conductivity, which is very interesting. So the idea here there is that you've got events like, a boson-to-sign condensate, for example, or a 0-point energy flux, where you've got a pure vacuum and suddenly you've got an electron and a positron appear. So matter and antimatter will appear and instantly annihilate, or they'll appear and they'll go off in different directions. And that's down to quantum event. And that quantum event will actually cause someone to observe it. So that our stream of consciousness is actually us interacting with or being interacted upon by a universe appearing around us in some way. So it's certainly very interesting research. It's quite speculative, as you can imagine, because it's saying this one thing we don't understand, which is consciousness, is explained by another thing we don't really understand, which is the observer effect. But we do have some evidence. So, for example, chlorophyll, when you have photosynthesis, a photon will hit a leaf with chlorophyll in it, and there'll be multiple pathways that this energy, it hits an atom, hits a molecule, which releases a little carrier signal, which hits something else and gives it energy to form starch chains, so that the plant can either break down or create starch. But when you measure the total energy throughput, it's more efficient than pure chaos would tell you. And so one of the effects I've noticed is that the gaps over which the photon hits and allows this signal to pass is smaller enough that sometimes the wave size of the observable quantum waveform of the signaling molecule signaling particle means it can travel over more than, it has the possibility of passing through more than one option.
Mm-hmm.
And it will take the option which gets it observed on the other side fastest, which makes it more efficient than Newtonian physics would dictate. So they sort of said that it is true that life is operating at this, using quantum effect in order to live and operate. And there was another one as well I was thinking of I can't remember it now. Anyway, so it's quite fascinating there when we're talking about this Bose-Einstein condensate in the movie. Of course, it requires a near absolute vacuum, and contact with anything or heat above anything close to absolute zero will basically cause it to stop being what it is. It'll turn into, suddenly your helium will congeal into ice, for example. But that being said, clearly they had come up with it as futuristic, and they had they did have a lot of power, so they'd be able to do the cooling. That's right. And they've got deuterium, they've got heavy reactors there. They'd be able to get as much of that as they want. So all you have to do then is do that little bit of science fiction hand wavy bit and saying they found a way.
That's right.
To project consciousness into the condensate, which gives it form. Because it's when they disconnected all of the brains from the system that these start to dissipate.
That's right.
So 1 + 1 equals ghosts.
Yeah.
But that's what I like about this movie is that it would have been so easy to have left it as this unknown, it really could have been the spirits of the dead from the war. Yeah. But they said no, and it sort of is really. And you could say then the legend, the Aratara, I think they're called. Yeah. So the local legend of these ghost spirits could well stem from natural occurrences in some fashion, maybe over short periods of this effect.
That's right.
Entirely sort of wraps up nicely, and that's what I like about this movie.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I saw just looking into it that the director Nic again said that he deliberately made it not a time setting of the film because of that technology. That the film kind of leads of what's happening. That this war, etc., could be 15 years from now, it could be 30 years, it could be 50 years. Yeah. And so it opened the door that, of course, technology keeps evolving and that maybe this is possible. And it is also implied in the film with the constant camouflage idea that, scientists are working for military all the time. And again, all it takes is one particular government to pour enough money into an experiment and you might end up with something like this, right? Especially for a war. So we, again, at the start of the film, we have in America this guy saying, well, have you tried it on a person? This is what the military does, apparently.
That's their job.
That's their job. They keep sort of pushing things. So, anyway, he did say that idea that, obviously it pushes the science, but, it could be 30 years from now and who knows,
Yeah, it does it less so than some movies.
Yeah. And the other thing is, what I liked is they did go to that effort of explaining that science. They did base it on that theory and took it to another level. Whereas, of course, we can have other films. You could have the same film, Spectral, where they never actually explain that. They could have just said, they were experimenting on these humans, and these humans, they were taking their energy source, but not tell us anything about the Einstein theory, like they just say, that's just what they've done, like it's not, whereas they sort of pushed it, they gave us enough. It reminded me a bit of the Beyond, that, that idea of there was a lot of science being explained in the film in a good way.
So what about some technicalities of the filmmaking? What did you pick up there?
Yeah. So I think it was a good question at the heart of the story, the idea of war, the negative effects of war, the locals thinking that, these strange creatures are the ghosts of war. They're stuck in there. War's nasty, and they were picking on that. I think, again, like we've talked about, push in science during wartime. I think there was a good sort of reason for that. And on one side of the fence, it's hard to sell a bit of a story with a scientist as the lead. Quite often scientists, they can be a scientist, but they're also, they're a jacked up action hero as well.
Yeah.
Whereas this guy wasn't, and even if you take the classic like Indiana Jones, like he's the professor nerd on one side, archaeologist, but then he is a tough adventurer on the other side, doesn't he? So it kind of, it equals itself out. He can be a bit of both. So it is a hard sell, but I think it paid off in that because he was such a scientist, that's kind of the question of the film. It's based on that science. So I liked that. The director also said that, they'd sort of created the crux of the story. They had it, and then they did do that research, and they thought with the spectrum and the condensate idea was interesting because, we wanted to play with light in the creatures. And if you think about it, the reverberations that they did, they go, that kind of explains a bit about the reverberations. He also said that secondly, like metaphorically, it's cold, that they're working off the science cold, and that the creatures could be cold. So that kind of works off that ghost idea. So he liked that. And also that they could be very unpredictable, that they could jump around and we didn't really know where we were coming from. Again, like you'll explain with the atoms and stuff, I think. So that works off that quantum idea again. So he liked that and I liked that. I thought the camera, like I said before, point of view, shooter idea, they played off. It is beautiful opening shot, nice sort of dolly back pan, zoom down onto this soldier that's tiny and then he kind of gets closer to us. And we're getting this, grim and grisly, beat up city, scenario. Yeah. And then he's an advanced military soldier, and it's a bit stereotypical, but base is saying hold your place, and he's like, no, I'm going forward.
6 or 7 minutes, I can't wait
that long, and we don't want him to wait that long either as the audience. We want him to get involved, And so I thought the camera throughout, like I mentioned, it felt like a high-powered action film. We move a lot. The angles are very depth of field. We get lots of blurry backgrounds, close-ups, and vice versa. You were mentioning Michael Bay. Yeah, I felt that as well. Reminded me of some of the classic older action films, of the 80s and the 90s, where we have this team of soldiers fighting something. And it did, that scene you talked about as well, there was a great pace in there that they were being chased by the creatures and they were kind of fighting them back but running and fighting them back and running, and it came to that courtyard scene. And likewise at the end, like you mentioned, like when they built their plan up, it was coming in on these helicopters, and then in fact it's a bit of a diversion, and then the lead characters are being dropped off somewhere else, and that was all shot really well three-dimensionally. I felt in the way that it was shot, but it was grim and it was grisly. And I think again, finding out later, the setting was so great. Like I loved that statue in the courtyard scene. That scene where they also drive into the city for the first time over the bridges. Yeah. They sort of have to swerve around all the cars. I mean, isn't that such a classic end of the world scene? But it was done really well, and we were coming in on not New York. It wasn't skyscrapers. It was European, wasn't it? It was all those sort of 4 or 5 story sort of apartments, the design on them. And they were all in ruins. Like I was impressed how much it looked shitty. It looked like a war was happening, And then even the setting, like you said, the hospital. Not the hospital. The power station at the end. Like it was a bit out of this world, that power station. And you do think about some of these regimes, maybe again like North Korea, and you're like, well, what is going on behind the scenes? So we've been taken to a foreign place, haven't we? I don't know if you've seen it, but I watched an episode of that Dark Tourist the other night, again on Netflix. And in that, he visits that town, that little tiny island in Japan, that overnight they shut down. And it had something like 6,000 residents, and they shut it down in the late 70s. And it was actually a little concrete island. It's commonly known as I've just forgotten, the Navy ship island, because it kind of looks like a battleship, It's just concrete all around. And it's built on top of a coal mine because that's where coal is. So they dug it up, and at one point they went, we've got enough, we're done with the coal, shut the whole island down. And it's all overgrown and it's run down now. And it reminded me of that. Like here's a Japanese town built on a tiny little island that was, flourishing until the 70s, and then there's nothing. And so we're coming in now 30 years later, and it's 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 weird. It's overgrown, it's decaying, and that's what this city felt like. Like it felt pretty alien in a way. We're seeing something cool, and I really liked that. And again, it reminded me of old World War II movies and stuff like that. So yeah, I liked it. It had a real grittiness to it, the camera, and the way that they pulled off that setting, I think. Yeah. Anything stand out to you?
Constantly moving camera. I particularly pay attention to that because I was watching someone's analysis of Michael Bay films and action films.
Yep.
And so I noticed that. I don't know which came first. Whether this is from Nic's experience as a commercial director where... he'll be making commercials that need to be sort of dynamic and continuously...
And they need to be fast and moving.
Interesting and attention-grabbing.
Yeah.
Or whether he actually went, okay, well, I'm going to be doing a feature-length action film.
Yeah.
Michael Bay, does those quite well. He gets paid a lot for those, so I'm going to give that a shot.
Sort of replicate some of that idea.
Yeah, so it's quite good. And the colouring of it was... very computer game. You should have had that sort of feel.
It did, and it was cold and grey, like we've talked about with quite often sci-fis. That doom and gloom sort of idea that sci-fi has. I liked it. I liked the look of the film. I thought the look of it really held me in the story. Like it was really something that. That opening shot, and there was many shots like that, as I said, the shot of the fountains and stuff, those little details that when they drove through the city the first time, there was an upside down old helicopter decaying, and it's like, I don't know, for me, when you go to that level of detail and it's real, it's great. Like as an audience, I really appreciate that. I love that attention to detail.
Yeah, like, as we said, you can see where they spent the budget.
That's where
it's
it
a very,
is.
very nice looking film. So speaking of that, then where does it rate in your ranking ladder?
Yeah. So look, I think I've sort of hinted at this. To me, it's going down the bottom rung. All right. So I've got Lobster, Other Life, Passengers, The Beyond, Equals, and Spectral is now my ladder. Alien is obviously on a separate run. I know last week we disagreed with Other Life. And the only reason why I say that is because of it being more actiony. Like I almost feel like this is an action film. I know it's sciencey. I know it's got the ghost and the other world, and it's a question mark. But it just the tone and the way the film all came together, I felt more action about it. It just felt like it fits the action genre. So that's my reason for putting it there. Yeah, it still fits the genre, but I feel like when I compare it to these other films, it's probably not quite ticking my science fiction box.
Okay, well, I was going to put it in just after Lobster, actually.
Right, okay.
I found it quite rewatchable.
Yep.
I found it looked great. I really did just like that this coming in to supernatural, but then turns, no, it is actually science. That always quite good. That sort of... I wouldn't call it genre bending, but certainly, it sort of combined a few elements, and I think combined it well enough that I enjoyed the journey going from mystery ghost things, because I was watching going, what could this be? How could this even possibly be real? What sort of situation I'm going to set up for this?
And I agree, like you've said, I'm glad it wasn't ghosts.
Yeah, or they could have just gone aliens.
Yeah, aliens.
And then it's just like, oh, okay, just whatever. That's moving to that technology so advanced, it's magic, and you're going, well, this, however, this is humans, and it's quite good. So, so put it there. I think mainly, because of that twist, and because it was beautiful, and because I'd watch it again.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Well, it's good to agree to disagree at times, I think.
So what are we looking at next?
I believe it's one on your list, The Darkest Dawn.
The Darkest Dawn.
Yeah. I have not seen it.
Produced by a YouTuber, and it stars a whole bunch of YouTubers.
Okay. So, is this a little bit B grade then, or is it?
I have no clue.
You haven't seen it before this one?
No, I haven't seen it before, but it is, I believe it's filmed in like a handycam style.
Okay, yeah, the point of
view.
Hence
the YouTube connection. I don't know anything more about that. It has to do with end of the world type scenario, aliens maybe. Not 100% sure, but I guess so.
Again, we're going in with the idea #JoyWatch. We're just going in. I went in with this one. I had no idea what this was about. And, just was like, okay, well, that's what it is. As you go in and I'm not looking at trailers. I'm not looking at blurbs until after I've watched it. And so, I look forward to The Darkest Dawn. Yeah,
it's a good idea to always expect to be delighted.
Yeah, definitely.
And look for the good stuff in there.
Definitely, man. All right, well, I think that's everything for Spectral.
Let's wrap up Spectral.
It was a very enjoyable film, great action, lovely setting, fantastic camera. I really loved the camera. I really appreciate it.
Beautiful opening shot. Even if all you do is
just watch that first
watch the opening shot, you do yourself a favour.
I think you'll be hooked back because that opening shot hooked. I was like, "Ooh, this is going to be good." I like this.
Yeah. Watch through to the reactor at the end again. It's amazing, the detail. It looks like such an interesting location, such an interesting place.
And if you do want a movie where there isn't that stereotypical action hero Tom Cruise saving the day, soldier, again, this film, it tries something different, and you got to appreciate that. We have a scientist, he's the lead the whole way through, and he is genuinely a scientist. He's not the superhero. He does save the day, but he's there. He's using his brain, not his brawn, to save the day, and his ethics. He's what he thinks is the right thing to do. So I liked that. I really did like that, and I think if you're looking for something that is a bit of a different style of here's a hero in a different way,
Yeah, I think so. Very, very, very enjoyable film.
All right, so we'll head on out and we will check out The Darkest Dawn
next time. Make sure you watch it before you tune in.
Yeah, and
make sure you get in touch with us and tell us what you think.
Yep.
And we'll see ya.
See you later.